Hi, I'm Arsham, and this series of videos about computer science and game development are sponsored by Kitakode. I've started taking a course called CS50 made by Harvard, which gives you all the knowledge you need for computer science and game development. And this series of videos are summarized versions of that course. Feel free to check it out for yourself. Now on to the video. In this video, we're going to be going over loops, and loops are one of the most important things to learn in programming, because it can be used to make your code much more efficient. There are different types of loops, one of which is a for loop. For example, if you're planting vegetables in your garden, you would need to repeat a process a specific amount of times, like digging a hole, putting the plant in the hole, covering it up, and watering it. The logic looks something like this. So basically, let's say we want to repeat it 4 times. We want to dig a hole, plant the vegetable, cover it up, and water the plant, and repeat this 4 times over. So basically, the things inside the loops are the tasks that are going to be repeated. Then we have another type of loop, and this one is called a while loop. And a while loop works on conditions, like while something is true, do a certain task, and once it's false, then it would stop the operation. We have one last important loop, which is pretty similar to the while loop, but this one is called a do while loop. And the difference between them is that the while loop checks if the condition in the loop is true, then executes it. But the do while loop executes the code in the loop once, then starts checking if the condition is true, so the loop can complete at least once. Now that we've learned the basics of loops, now let's try some out. Alright, so let's start with our loop examples. So our first example is getting a string and the amount of times you want to repeat that string from a user. So let's just make 2 variables, one of which gets our user's input. Basically, let's name a user input, and let's use the getString function from the CS50 library. And now we want them to, this was the prompted text, which is enter text. Now we want another variable, which is an int. Let's name it num. And let's use the getInt this time, since we want an integer, not a string. So enter number. Alright, cool. Now we have our 2 variables. We don't need to touch that. Now let's start with our for loop syntax. And the for loop is pretty interesting. All it is basically writing a for and then open parentheses. Time parentheses, not yet anything else. So what we need to do is define a counter variable. So basically a variable that can get incremented and iterates through basically. So what we need to do is just write int, and you can name it anything, but normally programmers use, like, for example, I, j, k, so on and so forth. So yeah, let's make it I equals to 0 initially, if you want to start from 0, and put a semicolon. And I know this doesn't seem right, normally the semicolon's outside, but we want to add more things here. And we want to add a condition, so let's say while, basically this is a while, I is less than our number, we want to iterate through it, keep going and looping through it. So I is less than num. It's pretty simple. And then every time this loops through, if we just loop it without adding something to it, it wouldn't loop technically, it would just stay in the same loop the whole time. So we need to add 1 to it every time, so increment it by 1. So as I talked about before, you can do this by just doing I++. So yeah, now we can open curly brackets, and like normal, like if statements as well. Now we want to print f, the string for the user, so %s, as I talked about before, and a \n. Then we put comma, and then we want user, comma, input. Cool. Now this should work. Now let's try make loops. Alright, cool. Now /loops. There you go. Now we have enter text. So let's say a person coughs a few times. Cough, and the amount of times, for example, 5. And as you guys can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was pretty simple. Now let's move on to our next example. So in this example, what we want to do is basically print out all the even numbers from 0 to 100. So let's just silent this first, and I'll talk about how we do that. And we've done this before by checking using modulo if something is even or not. But we haven't done it with for loops. So let's write a for loop. Again, we need to define a counter variable, 0, and while basically our condition is I is less than 100, so 0 to 100. And then we want to increment it by 1 every time as well. There you go. So now we open up circle brackets. Now what we do is write an if statement. We want to check if that number, basically I, gets incremented 1 every time. So if it goes through the loop, I will be 1 now, or 2, or 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth until it reaches 100. So we want to check if I divided by 2 or is divisible by 2 and has no remainder, then we want to print that. If not, then it wouldn't do anything. So yes, so we check I. We can take the I from this as well. This is a valid option. You can take I and use it here. So I module 2 equals 0, which checks if it's even or not. There we want to print it out. So print I \n. I forgot the quotations. Let me put the quotations in. There you go. Cool, comma, I. There you go. So now this should work. So let's test it out. Let's clear our cache and make loops. Oops, what happened? Okay, yes, print F, not print. Okay, cool. Make loops /loops. And as you guys can see, we have all our even numbers from 0 to 100. Of course, it's including 0. You can change that by just changing that to 1. Let's do that. Make loops /loops. And as you guys can see, it starts from 2 now. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so on and so forth, all the way until 98. So it doesn't do 100 because it's excluding 100. You can make it equal to. And we can test that out again. Make loops /loops. And as you can see, this time it also includes 100. As I talked about before, these are also operators, which I've talked about before. You can go watch that video as well, which might help you out. So yeah, now we've printed all the even numbers from 1 to 100. Alright, so let's start our third example. And this one is an example of an infinite loop basically. So a while, using a while loop that I've talked about before. Now we're going to go in depth on how to do it. So let's do it. Let's silence this code. And what we want to do is basically write a while loop. And a while loop is also pretty similar to a for loop. So we write while, and then we open parentheses. And here is the condition that should happen while, so the while loop can stay true and keep looping. So actually, to create an infinite loop is not that difficult. All we have to do is write true. And since true is always true, it would never become false, right? So we continue this forever and ever and ever, ever. Okay, so now what we want to do is print cough. Okay, so this might crash our computer, but I'm not going to let it crash our computer because basically if we print cough forever and it never stops, so it keeps going, it's going to fill up our terminal very, very, very quickly. So what we want to do is just print cough \n. So now we can import a library. So let's import it, include, and what this library does, it basically lets you have a bit of a delay. So let me show you guys what I mean. So once you, as you guys can see, this is the library. You can import it as well yourself. So yeah. Now let's use a function that it has called sleep. And sleep basically lets you have a delay on what you want to do. Like let's say every time we print cough, we want it to wait 1 second. So let's test it out. So make loops /loops, and now it's going to cough every 1 second or so. So cough, 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 cough. And unless you stop this, it will keep going on forever. And it would be a bit hectic if I remove this just completely, and it would go brrr all the way down itself. So let's open a new terminal and close the previous one, because we don't want that anymore. Okay, so now let's move on to our fourth example. And in this example, this can be done in many ways. We want to check while a number is less than, for example, 10, keep printing that number and incrementing it by 1. This can be done with for loops as well, but I'm just giving an example of a while loop for now. But my task to you guys is try to figure out how you do it with a for loop. It's actually much more simple than doing this. I don't see a point in doing this actually. This is a very inefficient way, but I'm just giving you guys examples of a while loop. So int num equals 1. So let's make a variable just called num and set the value to 1. Now we want to check while our num is less than 10, we want to keep doing these certain tasks. So we want to num, and we want to increment it, and we also want to print it. Print f %i, don't forget the \n, comma, num. This should work now, and basically what this does, equivalent to a for loop that I'll show you guys now, It's much more easier to do with a for loop actually. I'll show you guys right after this. Make loops dot slash loops, and it coughs. Oh, okay, yeah, no, sorry, it's this one. We haven't silenced this one. Let's make a new one. Make loops dot slash loops. Okay, see, as you guys can see, it starts from 2. Actually, you can start it from 0. I made a mistake of starting it from 1, sorry. Make loops dot slash loops. Okay, so now it prints all the numbers from 1 to 10. And again, I told you guys this can be done much more simply with a for loop. I'm going to show you guys now. So for int I, 0 set to 0, while I is less than 10, I plus plus. Basically the same thing we did for the even, checking if the number is even, but instead this time checking it, we're just printing it straight away. So printf %i, I, and don't forget the \n and the semicolon at the end. So yes, clear the terminal, make loop dot slash loops, and as you guys can see, it does the same thing. You can even start from 1 in case, since it starts from 0 over here and goes to 9. So let's just make let's make it less than or equal to as well. And this time, in this case, let's just check it out. Make loops, slash loops. There you go, 1 to 10. And this was a much more simple way of doing basically this. So we don't need this anymore. Okay, so let's start with our 5th example. And this is a good way of actually checking what your user has input. If it's something that you don't want them to input, then it keeps reprompting them basically. So let's get started. So let's start by making a variable, just declaring it, not giving it a value. So you just int n, let's just name it n for example. And this time we want to use a do while loop. And why we're using a do while loop is because it actually prompts the user once before checking our condition. So what we want to do is n equals get underscore int, yes, int, not input. And then we want to ask them for positive int. Okay, cool. Now, how we do that, how we check our condition is after this curly brackets, we will while, and we check our condition. So while n is less than 0, we want to continue this. So this is actually pretty simple that we're done. Make loops, and okay, I didn't put an equal sign there. Okay, and yes, make loops dot slash loops. Okay, now let's enter a number, like for example -10, -1. See, it's reprompting the user because it doesn't meet its requirements, which is a positive integer. So let's say we give it, for example, 20. As you guys can see, the program stops because it gets what it needs. And we could take this another step further and just print it out, but we don't really need to. This is just basically a way of reprompting the user and validating that what they input is what you need and not just something random. Alright, now we know the basics of for loops in programming. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It makes you notified every time I upload. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.